Okay, we are rolling.
Otherwise,
Whenever
I
you guys are ready.
introduce
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
I'll be bouncing around, so forgive. I'll try to distract you too.
Okay, no
Thank
worries.
you.
Representative Escobar, it's good to see you again.
Good to
Thank you
see
for the
you too.
opportunity of this interview. Topic number one for many people here on the border is the overwhelming number of unaccompanied children seeking asylum in the U.S. since the defeat of President Trump in November. I'm sure this is a frequently asked question for you. Is there any solution on the horizon other than having to put them up, other than having to put up more tents, spend millions of dollars more along the border to house them, or closing the border as President Trump did?
Absolutely. And believe me, this has been an issue, obviously top of mind for me, not just since January 20th when President Biden was inaugurated, but going back to 2014. Many of us here in El Paso in our community have been doing our best to help migrant families as they've been released from federal custody. The greatest example of that goodwill is Ruben Garcia of Annunciation House. So I think it's important to be clear and remind the American public this is not a new issue. The increase in unaccompanied children actually began in September of last year. And this is per data from the Border Patrol. So the increase in children arriving at our front door happened months ago. It did not begin with President Biden. What we are living through right now, unfortunately, is a consequence of decades of what I consider failed foreign policy and failed domestic policy. We've had over the last few decades a focus only on the border as our approach to migration. And so the idea was, and this is under Democrats and Republicans alike, build walls, buy drones, hire more personnel, and somehow that will, quote unquote, solve the problem. The reality is migration doesn't ever stop. And immigration is a net positive for our economy. Very few people want to talk about that because it is, although the data shows that immigrants provide a positive economic impact, many people prefer to focus on the challenges that come with new arrivals. We have not paid attention to anything outside of our borders in our hemisphere in any sustained, strategic, thoughtful way. President Obama made the attempt after the 2014 numbers that we saw, and if you'll recall in 2014, the Rio Grande Valley was seeing a significant number of Central American families. They were flown to El Paso for processing here. And what President Obama decided to do was engage Central America, which is where the families were coming from. He started the Central American Minors Program so that children who want to reunite with their families have access to a legal pathway. He started in-country processing, but all of that was done away with by President Trump. So we're seeing the consequences of a number of unsustained attempts at addressing the root causes. So I wanted to offer that context because that gets me to how we address this. And I think it's a two-pronged approach. I think first and foremost, we have to have a thoughtful and urgent strategy with our neighbors to the south. And that is the numbers of the countries in the Northern Triangle, and it includes Mexico. We're seeing a lot more single adults asking for asylum from Mexico. Vice President Kamala Harris has been tasked with that. I had a wonderful conversation with her the day after my New York Times piece was published. She and I talked through some strategies and ideas, and I know we're going to be connecting again. In the short term, what the Biden administration is doing is trying to get those kids out of CBP custody into HHS custody. That's where the influx facilities come in, because shelters were not expanded or the capacity wasn't expanded at the end of President Trump's term. So get those kids out of CBP custody and get them as quickly as possible into the arms of their families. About 85% of those kids have a close family member in the United States.
So what happens to those kids who don't have families here. Most of them can't make their cases for asylum, so they just get sent back to families or to family members if they can they have them here. And what then?
Yeah. So about 15% of the children in U.S. custody right now, whether it's CBP custody or HHS custody, about 15% of them don't have a close family member here. They don't have a sponsor. They've made the journey on their own to begin a new life. Most of them will be repatriated to their home country.
There are a lot of reports that many of the children aren't really children at all, but young adults with ties to drug and human trafficking cartels trying to grow their networks in the United States. How big a problem is that?
I think we always need to be as aware as possible of who our who's coming into our country. That's very important. And we do need to make sure, and I want to state that unequivocally, that we do need to make sure that we are being as thorough in our investigative process as possible. But even this morning, the numbers that I heard during a visit to the processing center, while it's definitely a problem, it is not the overwhelming number, and I would say as a percentage it's probably pretty low. But for those who say that that isn't a significant problem, I'd like to see their data.
For a lot of people, the issue number 2 is probably the January 6th attack on the Capitol building. Now you have cherry blossoms and barricades around the White House and the Capitol. How did we get here, and do you have serious concerns about the nation going forward?
I do. This is a really heartbreaking topic for me because I have never seen in my lifetime, nor I think have any of us seen in our lifetime, or understood just how fragile our democracy is. Mm-hmm. And the fact that that piece of paper that is our Constitution, it can either be a piece of paper or it can truly be a symbol of our values and who we are as a nation. The January 6th attack was a long time in coming, and there was a building up to that moment. And I've thought a lot about how we've gotten here. And we've gotten here, I think there's a lot of things that have brought us to this moment. I think the breakdown of civil society and of folks getting together in groups and organizations and working together. You know, I think about Rotary clubs as an example, and other organizations that come together for the common good, and just how they've shrunken over the years. I mean, there's still some very robust, wonderful groups and organizations, but my generation is not participating in the same way that my parents' generation did. So there's that breakdown. There's also been the breakdown, I think, of good, strong local newspapers that report on everything that's happening in your community, that make you feel connected to what's happening on the ground, make you feel invested in what's happening. I think the proliferation of cable TV media and news, I don't see as a positive. I think the incredible irresponsibility of Fox News. I know there's a lot of Fox News fans out there, but when you during the impeachment trial, you know, I was trying to watch. This was the first impeachment, and actually preceding it, I remember watching a lot of Fox News to try to see what other folks watch. You know, I prefer to read newspapers, but I wanted to see what folks were watching. And I was shocked, David, and I saw Fox News as an arm of Russian propaganda. Much of what we were told in closed hearings, much of what I was learning in high-level briefings, warnings about propaganda that was intended to divide us as a country, and that was intended to help create basically an autocracy. I was seeing it broadcast on Fox News. You know, I was one of the last remaining members of Congress in the gallery the day that we were surrounded, the day that we were attacked. And in fact, I was among the very last members to leave because I stayed behind because I wanted to be of help to my colleague, Pramila Jayapal, who had just had knee surgery. And knowing that we were going to have to evacuate down a series of flights of stairs, my colleague, Mikey Sherrill from New Jersey, was physically helping Pramila. I was trying to keep doors open so that Pramila and Mikey could walk through. I did not want to leave until I knew that we were all safely out of there. And as the trauma of that moment became more and more real, I remember thinking, maybe this will be the moment. Maybe this will be the reckoning where my colleagues withdraw their objections and they say, we are no longer going to participate in this big lie. And so we were told at 8 o'clock that evening to be ready, for those of us who wanted to go back into the House chamber, to be ready in case we wanted to be there for the proceedings. In the unsafe safe room where we were held for the hours before 8 o'clock arrived, I was next to a very high-ranking member of the Republican caucus, and that person shall remain unnamed, but we were very close together, and this person was on the phone. This member of the Republican Party was not an objector. This person of the Republican Party was not participating in the big lie. And this member of the Republican Party was clearly on the phone with a colleague saying, well, I'll talk to so-and-so if you talk to so-and-so, and maybe we can end this tonight. And so I actually felt a little hopeful that while it was a horrible, traumatic event, maybe it was the event we needed to turn a corner and to reject everything that had led us to that moment. So at 8 o'clock, I go into that chamber with my comadre, my colleague, my dear friend, Sylvia Garcia from Houston, and I literally, David, prayed that this would be a turning point for our country. And guess what? The objections continued. Mm-hmm. And I sat in shock and I thought, after everything that just happened today, you are still proceeding?
President Biden and the Democratic Congress, members of Congress, have pushed through a $1.9 trillion surplus package and now want to spend $2.5 trillion on infrastructure and infrastructure splurge, the likes of which hasn't been seen since the post-war years in the early 1950s. What are your thoughts on this and any concerns that you may have about a spending package like that? And what do you like the most about it?
In fact, this morning I had a great conversation with Senator Carper's team. His staffer is actually writing the bill right now, the infrastructure bill, and he's the chairman on the Senate side, so it's a very powerful position. So his presence in El Paso was more than just about touring the border. We had important conversations about our infrastructure, and that includes our water infrastructure. El Paso has long had colonias and communities on the outskirts of town in the county. And as county judge, I knew only too well how difficult and expensive it is to bring water and wastewater services to neighborhoods that are further away from the center of town. And yet it's an imperative. We have to do it. But it was cost prohibitive for a local government like county government, where the needs are enormous and your budget is in comparison is minuscule.
You could do a municipal utility district and assess it to the property owners.
Well, and there were ways of pushing the cost onto the property owners, but many of these individuals are among the poorest in the state of Texas. So had a great conversation with Senator Carper and his team this morning about the water infrastructure that will be in this package. And in terms of the match, part of what keeps communities like ours out of accessing federal funds is putting up a large match, 40%. How do you come up with that money? And so you have to shrink your goals. Well, the approach will be for economically disadvantaged communities like ours that the match would be 10%, and in some cases it could possibly be forgivable. So I have lots of hope and optimism about what we will do for those who have been in the most need and lived in poverty chronically over time. I also am very excited about what this could mean in terms of our own ambition for transit, mass transit, and easing the burden off of the local property tax base and putting it more so on the federal government.
Will it pass, and are you worried about the debt if it does? Are you concerned about paying off the debt? Because it's getting big.
I am concerned about paying off the debt, and I believe we need tax
paying
reform.
on it anyway.
Right, and I think we need tax reform. I don't think now is the time to act in any way other than in a bold, ambitious way for our country. Our roads, our bridges, our infrastructure are falling apart. We've seen the digital divide between those kids who've been at home without broadband versus those kids who do have broadband. We ultimately pay the price. Our own ports of entry, I consider critical infrastructure, and I want to direct funding towards them as well. So we have to do this. This is critical, and I think by reforming the tax code we can.
Okay. Where are we as far as COVID-19 and the efforts going on in El Paso?
Thank you, Jasmine.
To curtail it and to free us up.
My urgency has been twofold. Number one, creating a binational plan, not just for COVID, but for future pandemics. I sounded the alarm with the Trump administration. I had multiple conversations with Dr. Anthony Fauci and others about the need for the federal government to understand the unique nature of border communities and our interdependence and the fact that we need one another and that we need to have our borders open to safe, secure travel, commerce, etc. It was very clear to me from the onset that President Trump was deeply uninterested in this. I mean, we didn't even have a national plan, much less a binational plan. So after the election and after it became clear that President Biden would be the president, I called Dr. Fauci again and I said, "It's me again, and I want you to elevate this, please, to the task force level." He said he would. And I've had a number of conversations with folks at the White House about the need to think about binational communities in a unique way. And I completely understand and support their priority, which is vaccinations for all Americans, but that as we think globally, we need to think about our neighbors closest to us because it's advantageous to us to make sure they're as safe as we are. So the binational COVID plan has been a priority for me. But also, ever since the president was sworn in, it was getting as many vaccines to El Paso as possible and getting resources to ensuring that some of our most vulnerable populations have access to the vaccine. Folks who don't have access to transportation, folks who don't have access to computers or laptops in order to sign up for the vaccines. So we worked with the Biden administration and we're able to bring in some pretty significant funding. I think about $12 million for our FQHCs, our federally qualified health clinics, and vaccines directly to our clinics that wouldn't take away from the city's effort.
As we look back to the congressmen, the members of Congress that we had, with Richard White served 20 years in Congress. Ron Coleman came along, basically was 14 years, followed by Sylvester Reyes for 16 years, and was defeated by Beto, who term limited himself, if I'm not mistaken, promising to run no more than 3 terms, I think, and he ran 2, wasn't it?
I think
was it 3?
Right.
When you think about how long you should stay in the House, working 2,000 miles from home, what comes to mind?
I want to work as long as I'm effective for the community. And that's the way that I saw my role in county government as well. What a lot of folks don't know is that I had no intention of running for re-election for county judge. So that would have been 3 terms. But I didn't want to make myself a lame duck, so I wasn't planning on announcing it. And in fact, was looking at opening a small business. And so my family and I had been talking about that, but really had not shared that with very many people, just very close friends and family. And I felt that it was somebody else's turn, and that I was leaving county government in much better shape than I had found it, and so I had done my job, and that it was the next person's turn to take it to the next level and do exciting things, with such an important local government. And it wasn't until Beto announced he was running for U.S. Senate that I thought about continuing in public service in a different capacity. But I am a big believer that you need to do everything possible for as long as you possibly can and then get out of the way.